Welcome to the Monday Morning Marketing Podcast for all decision makers and action takers. Take it away, Esther.
And welcome back to another episode of the Monday Morning Marketing Podcast. Today we're joined by the fabulous, the wonderful Lady in Red herself, Christine Gritmon, who is a personal brand strategist. And we will be talking about, guess what? Personal branding. Funny that, isn't it? Welcome,
I
Christine.
thought we were talking about gnomes.
We can.
I've got the wrong set of notes here entirely.
I don't think you really need any notes when you're talking about either personal branding or gnomes.
It's true.
So
it's all up here.
It is. So tell us about yourself, Christine. How did you get into personal branding?
Sure. I actually got started in personal branding when I was a journalist. So that was a few careers in. I'm not going to go through the whole process there, but I became a journalist in my mid-30s, shortly after having my second child. And the second child bit does have something to do with it, which is that's once I had two kids, I sort of really felt this is the time in life when women disappear thing. I started figuring out, oh, this is why all the women at the networking events I go to are in their 20s or their 50s, because people just kind of disappear into their families for a bit in their 30s and 40s, women particularly a lot of times. And so I felt that, and I felt the pull of that, and I kicked extra hard against the current. So it was sort of like I burst on the scene out of nowhere at that time, and that's also when I became a journalist. But it was just kind of a perfect storm of just being the right time and the right place and the right circumstance to do the opposite of disappearing and to be really visible. And journalism wise, it also made sense to me to be visible and known in the communities that I was covering, because it was a local paper. It covered 3 different counties, so I figured it was important for me to be known by the communities that I was covering.
Well, going by your particular personal brand, nobody can miss you. You are genuinely the lady in red.
The red wasn't a thing yet at that point.
No.
No, I mean, it's always been my favorite color. There's always been some red. But at that time, it was more about being known as, this is Christine. She works for the paper. She's at all the events. She, supports the nonprofits. She supports the local businesses, blah, blah, blah. That's what it was then. Though, when I started my own business in May of 2016, it did help springboard me, even though I was entering a completely different sphere. I was moving from journalism to social media strategy. It did help springboard me simply because I was known, I was liked, and I was trusted by the people in my local community. And that trust and that sense of my own, they kind of identified me as a social media expert before I identified myself as one, or before I really felt like one. And so their trust in me sort of helped me into the next stage of my career. So even though my branding's a little different now and I'm known for something different now, it really was just a case of a rebrand, really. I still consider the personal brand that I'm running on now to have started in that journalistic environment.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So now you've got a full circle and you've explained where you are at now.
Mm-hmm.
Our listeners have probably not given some serious thought to their personal brand, for some of them for some time, or for the startups or the beginners. It's a concept they hadn't even considered. They're so busy worried about who the customers are and what their products and services are. So how is a personal brand important for these types of businesses, from small solo startups to large corporates?
It's important because it connects to your visibility, and especially your relevant visibility. If the people who need you can't find you, you can't help them. So personal branding to me is a few things. It is, of course, being known, being findable. People, know who the heck you are. It is also being trusted. People understand the context of why they know who you are, and that context is a positive one. They know who you are because they know you're good at what you do. And then that further level, and the thing that makes a personal brand even more, important than kind of a brand in other ways, is that people don't trust brands, companies, organizations quite as much as they trust other human beings. If they're going to put their money in your hands, if they're going to put their business in your hands, they really need to trust you. They need to trust that you know what you're talking about. They need to trust that you're going to work in a way that is comfortable for them. And by putting yourself out there as a human being, that's really the best way to earn that trust. It's also the best way to stick in people's heads because,
Mm.
again, there's so many other brands out there, but there really is only one you. It's so trite, but other people do what you do, and other people do it quite well, but nobody else is you. It's your only real competitive advantage.
So if you were talking to a solopreneur now, would you tell them to brand under their name? Like you yourself have christinegritmon.com as your website. I'm guessing, I can't remember.
It's Gritmon.com, which my husband
Okay.
actually owned long before he met me, and it's mine now. But if you go to ChristineGritmon.com, it will redirect. I made sure to buy that
Okay,
too.
good. So getting back to the question, if you were talking to someone who was starting their own business on their own and they were coming up with a name that was sort of like an umbrella term, or was like a more of a company name,
Mhm.
would you recommend that they actually don't call it by a company name and just give it the name of you.com? Or, well, don't do that because that's an AI system, but give it the name of christinegritmon.com or melanieboylan.com, or .co.uk.ie, whichever dot you want to put on the end.
Mhm.
What advice would you give?
I think you should definitely have that because that way at least you own the domain for your own name and identity if you ever want to use that. I think it's kind of a twofold thing. On the one hand, it depends on what you plan to do because if you are planning on growing it into an agency that employs multiple people, that you could do an agency name, but I would recommend also building up your own name. You can do both. In fact, I've got someone on my own podcast just this past week who has done that. They got known as themselves, and then they also built an agency, but the fact is they are kind of the primary influencer for their agency, as it were. They're the person who's getting on stages, who's, building those relationships, and people know who the person is.
More
And
than the agency.
exactly. And it also opens up your pathways because the fact is, people are hiring the person to go speak on stages. They're having the person on podcasts, things like that. And then maybe that will lead work back to the agency, which is great. If it literally is just you, sometimes people do kind of put a company name to it so that they sound bigger. I
Mhm.
don't think bigger is an advantage. Some people think that if they sound bigger, if they sound like they are an agency when it's really just them, people will take them more seriously. It'll seem like they're more of a real company. But again, people trust people, people trust human beings. And small is really a superpower if you're doing something that involves relationships, which most things ultimately do.
Okay, I want to flip this on its head a little bit, Christine, if that's
Ooh.
okay.
No, it's
So,
not.
oh, kind of told me, didn't
It's your show, girl. Do it.
it? So let's say this is a larger agency, okay?
Mhm.
And they've developed this personal brand and they've made their way up in the world. And they've now got a brand that's recognizable, but they get a member of staff to come in to manage their brand so that they can continue going to see people in person, face to face, and that sort of stuff. So, if we were to help that member of staff understand what the personal brand is, how would we do that?
So, to be clear, the member of staff is managing the personal brand of the higher up executive,
Yes.
sort of ghostwriting it for them.
Yes.
Okay, well, my first thing is I don't like that. I'd be making a lot more money if I did like that because people certainly, there's money for that. People do want to hire someone to write their thought leadership pieces and their social posts and all of that. And my problem is that is it's not coming from them unless it does. So here's what I would recommend doing in that circumstance. And this is actually something that I've done a little bit of, which is have the executive in question, like interview them, basically. have them give you their actual thoughts, their actual viewpoints, their actual expertise. And then I'd say that junior staff members should just chop that into bits. Like maybe some of it, like maybe they do a video where they're interviewing the person and they use some video clips, or they just use some of the transcript from that and spin it out into a lovely written piece. Another thing that I helped someone out with once was there was someone in financial services, and that's very restricted as to what, especially in the States, as to what they're allowed to say. They're not allowed to be construed as giving advice. But I needed him to put his personal stamp on it because he subscribed to a service of pre-approved articles and things like that to share. And so I had like 3 different people, himself included, in my inbox sending me the exact same emails every week. Like, that is not good. So I told him, I said, you know what? You can curate. Curated content is fine. First of all, I helped him narrow down his algorithm within that program to focus on the areas he cared about most. So he was a financial advisor, and he was really big on teaching people to start healthy financial habits young. That was a big thing with him. And so we made sure that if he was going to share something, it was going to be about healthy financial habits. And a lot of times it was something that he did have something to say on. I said, okay, so don't just share it. Say why you found it worth sharing. You got to watch out not to give advice, but say why you found this article interesting. Maybe ask people what they think of something that's in the article. I mean, that's another way to go about it. Really narrow down those sort of content pillars, as it were, those topics that the person really cares about, narrow it down to just a few, and you have a lot more freedom there. Freedom with guardrails, essentially. It gives you a lot that you can do within those parameters. So those parameters are the part that makes it authentic to the other person's brand. And hopefully you can still get their thoughts on it and then just pretty them up. But overall, I think that the executive or whoever's personal brand it is has to be involved on some level. I don't really feel like they should entirely farm it out. They can have another person prettying it up, but I think the root should come from them because they're the expert.
Cool. Thank you.
Okay, so that leads me on then to rebranding your personal brand.
Yeah.
Because, how do you change your persona? We've talked on this podcast on numerous occasions, and recently with Ange, about rebranding and about changing your colors and changing your message and change as a company. So how does a person do that without, because you yourself have done it. You started as a journalist and then moved into different careers. And,
I've done it. I've helped other people do it.
And so what would a process look like for going from, say, very corporate, very, strict professional language into more fun-loving or the opposite way around, because you could go from
interesting to boring.
Well, I was thinking like going from your 20s where, you speak differently to in our, 40s, etc., where we are supposed to have a little bit more sense. I said more sense. I did not say boring.
Sorry.
I will never have sense. No, I think that the biggest, most important thing, especially if it's a career change, but even if it's just changing your visuals or whatever, but it's all about putting the emphasis on the bits that are remaining the same. And that should be your values. That should be your personality on some level. That's another reason why your face is the most important asset that your brand really has, your face and your voice, because those are going to stay the same. And those are the things that people kind of register familiarity with. So I've talked to people who have changed careers, changed what they're doing, and you put the emphasis on the part that is kind of a transferable skill. So in my case, I was a journalist in our local community, and I wrote about businesses in our local community. And so who did I go to help when I started? Businesses in our local community, and it's grown beyond there. But and personal branding, I made a switch from being mostly about helping small businesses with social media to helping businesses of all sorts with personal branding. But it made a lot of sense because I'm essentially doing very similar things. I'm using a lot of the same tools. And I really made the switch because people started noticing me for personal branding. I said, well, why don't I offer this? But even if you're a totally different industry, I was talking to someone who worked helping companies with their sourcing and making their sourcing procedures more efficient and more green. She was becoming a coach, like a corporate teams coach.
Hmm.
And I said, well, it's all about making systems healthier. I said, that's what you did in procurement, and that's what you're doing as a coach. You're helping make systems healthier. So that's what she's emphasizing. But sorry, I saw a finger.
So yes, the personal branding. When I hear that word, I'm more thinking about, because it's personal. I'm sort of thinking about the clothing and the color and
Mhm.
the way I wear my hair and that sort of thing. Um, when you go and change your business, your direction, let's say, you're not really going to go and change your hairstyle and replace all your clothes, are you?
No, the window dressing and the actual product, which is the person. I know
Yeah.
that sounds terrible, but the window dressing and the product itself are completely different things. You can change both, you can change neither. Some people go around wearing their brand colors like crazy people. Some of them even go dyeing their hair that color. For those who didn't know, I wear a lot of red and I used to have bright red hair. You don't have to do that. You can just look like you, whatever you is, just look like that. The brand needs to follow the person is what it comes down to. If the person, if your look changes, yeah, definitely change your branding to fit it so that people recognize you and know who the heck you are. I've been to so many events where I meet someone and then I look them up on LinkedIn and I don't even know that it's them. So your
Mhm.
branding should follow your changes, but you are the one who leads everything. Just be you, just be comfortable in yourself and just update the branding so it follows. Similarly, to kind of get back to what you were saying before about like maybe you're going from a very corporate serious environment to being a little freer or vice versa, that can all be communicated by things like clothing and style, but it's also communicated by language, it's communicated by the type of graphics you use, certainly. um, and I think a lot of those things can sort of be intuited by just living in the world. I mean, you know that if something is in navy blue script, it is going to read very differently than if it's in like a hot pink bubble lettering. It's
Yeah.
just going to read differently. And part of that is, I mean, you can work with designers, you can also trust in yourself and your own vibe and feel like what appeals to you. Ultimately, it's really about trusting yourself, trusting your own intuition and opinions, and letting those be your guide, and always remembering that it's you who guides the branding and not the other way around.
I like that.
I actually think that's probably going to be an excerpt on Missing Letter.
I
So where I wanted to go with this now is, how long does this process take, and can it be a very costly thing to do? Are we talking hours, days, weeks? And I'm sure there's a sliding scale depending on the type of people you're working with. But you know, you must have to arrange it for a budget for this sort of thing. So what are we looking at, ballpark, Christy?
It can cost nothing.
Oh, Andy.
Yeah, honestly, it really can. A lot of it is about, I mean, you should buy your domains, but a lot of that is really just about how confident you are in how well you can outwardly express what you're trying to express. And what you're trying to express should come from yourself. You should not be inventing something. This should
Right.
not be creating a character. This should not be, drawing up a caricature of what you think you ought to be. It's about figuring out how to express yourself the best possible way. Now, I do know people who have spent tens of thousands of dollars and, a whole year on sorting, new color scheme for themselves and for their materials, new designs for their materials, new websites, new copywriting. They trained a
Wow.
new AI. There's stuff people do. It can cost as much or as little as you want, but I do think the first
Gee.
step, no matter what, before you hire somebody, should be just kind of, throwing things at the wall and seeing what sticks. Just kind of put yourself out there. It's sort of like creating video or writing or something like that. Start doing it bit by bit when nobody's watching. see what feels good, see what catches with other people. Sorry, alarm. See what feels good, see what catches with other people as well. And that is going to help guide what becomes a strategy. So, myself, for example, when I was a journalist, I was just me. I wasn't really giving thought to the impression necessarily. And I started seeing what stood out to people about me and what sort of rose to the top. Then, when I launched my own business, I sort of emphasized those things. And that was 2016. 2020, I went through a rebrand. And that rebrand was three parts. One of them was I decided my focus was no longer social media for small businesses, though I still did and do that. I decided I wanted to become known for personal branding. And it did turn out to be something that was a narrower field to be known for.
Mm.
So there was that. So that changed my messaging and what I put out there and my headlines and all of that. I changed my fonts and I made my already existing color palette more formalized instead of being kind of all sorts of red all over the place. No, I'm hex code CC0000. That is Christine Gritmon
You
red.
remember it.
Yeah, well, I use it all the time. So I sort of formalized that. I spent a month or two looking at different font combinations on Pinterest and decided on these ones because I wanted it to I knew what I wanted it to feel like, but before I was making do with what was available to me for free. And I said, you know what? I'm actually going to buy fonts. I'm actually going to sit here and work on a logo. I have graphic design training, but if I hadn't, I probably would have hired someone to do a logo for me at that point because I was ready for more formalized branding. But that was a choice. I didn't have to be, and I was as legitimate before as I am now. And then the other part of it was I did get new pictures, especially since for a long time I did have the bright red dye in my hair and I had decided to stop doing that. So I certainly didn't want people to meet me at an event with bright red and, with not bright red hair and then find me online. And, I want it all to match. I'll probably be due for a photo shoot next year because I'm starting to let my silvers grow out. So that at some point will necessitate a new shoot because I don't want people to meet this gray haired lady and then go find this red-haired lady or a brown-haired lady.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so you can go as hard with it as you want or not. And another thing to remember is it's not locked in forever. It really doesn't have to be because people evolve. And that's another really nice thing about a personal brand. It can just evolve. You can just start incorporating more things. I've been really liking more dark blue and sort of dark denims lately. And so there've been a few professional events where I've worn that. And that's not, previously part of the Christine Gritmon color scheme, but you know what? I'm a human. I get to wear what I want. And I actually did just do a shoot that has some of that color in it just so I can officially incorporate some of it. But that's just because I feel like it. It's not because I decided via deep professional analysis that, the people need more blue from my brand. No,
There you go.
it's just pretty.
Now, Christine, are there any industries or like job descriptions that would be harder to come out of with a personal brand in?
Yeah.
Or is this something that everybody can do?
Both. I do think everyone can do it because all that is required to meet the definition of a personal brand is to be a person. So there's different levels where you could do it. But I mean, I've definitely met people in certain industries that make them less comfortable with some of the more outward elements of personal branding. Lawyers, for example. Some lawyers totally love having a personal brand. Some lawyers feel it's unprofessional. There's also restrictions on what you can and cannot say. Again, financial services is like that. Medicine can be like that. It's about, where it's about things that have external parameters on them on some level in terms of the amount of stuff you can talk about regarding what you
Of
do.
course, yeah.
However, I've seen people in all of those industries who have absolutely still had personal brands. They have found other things to say. They've found ways to talk around things. They've found ways to talk near things. They've found ways to do it. And it's just a matter of respecting the parameters that are on you. And again, there's people who do things where they have total freedom of what they can talk about, who still keep things very close to the vest because, again, the brand has to follow you. And if you're not an oversharer and if you're not someone who wants to talk about things all the time, that's you, and that's what you have to work with, and people are doing it.
Must be very difficult as an introvert to have a personal brand, now you mention
And
it.
yet I know several people who do. I know people where part of their personal brand is
Being an
introversion,
introvert.
and they
Okay,
talk
fair
about
enough.
it. And they talk about they say, the world wants you to think that the extroverts are the ones making everything happen and introverts need to be more extroverted. And they're like, I'm here to tell you that introversion is a superpower and here's why. And that's great that they're often writing it, not saying it, but that's fine. Whatever works for you. The brand needs to follow you. You don't need to fit into someone else's brand. In fact, you should not fit into someone else's brand. You should be you, and that's what'll make you stand out from those other people who are not you.
Well, that sort of brings me on to another question then.
Mm.
And I know like we're probably over time, but this is
Yeah.
gold dust, guys. Listen to Christine Gritmon.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have a company and have external, people, as I mean, like not family members, not
Mm-hmm.
yourself,
Yeah.
who are posting about the company, should they be allowed to post in their own sort of tone of voice, or should they have to follow the company line of this is what we say and we do not reveal more about ourselves? Sort of thinking like, I don't know, say Coca-Cola. Who's
Mm-hmm.
behind the tweets and the posts of Coca-Cola? The anonymous people, but do they get to show their true personality, or would they have to do a personal brand sort of separate to the company they work for?
Well, it definitely varies. I think the idea that employees should be sort of muzzled is a very old fashioned idea. And I feel like companies who do that, they honestly lose people. Simply because, I mean, part of it is generational. Just try shutting the Gen Zs up. That's not the world they grew up in. And it's trickling into the workplace. And millennials are the bosses now, increasingly. And so it's a different world. And employees ultimately don't like feeling like their personal expressive channels belong to the company because they don't belong to the company.
Mm.
Back in the olden days, you'd get a job with a big company, a secure job. If you first of all you were a man, you get a secure job
Or
with a
life?
big
Yeah.
company for life. And so you would kind of belong to the company in a lot of ways. And that's not how it works on either end
Mm.
anymore. But also, honestly, there are an increasing number of stories now where employees have garnered more goodwill for the companies they work for because they put a human face on it. Sometimes they're more in touch with the way people actually speak, and they're able to so it's kind of a twofold thing. I feel like you're getting at. One of them is employees of a company, how is like should they be kind of muzzled for how they can talk about things. And I think as long as it's within the confidentiality agreements, I think it's fine. I mean, you shouldn't badmouth the company, but I think that's in a lot of agreements as well. But
Hmm.
I don't think the messaging of an individual should be controlled by the company they work for. And I think that the backfires on companies who try to do that. But then in addition to that, if you're someone who's running the social for something like Coca-Cola, that too is changing. I feel like the people who run social for big companies, they used to be pretty anonymous. Now I know a lot of them. And it's been great for the companies because they have these people going on stages and giving interviews and going on podcasts saying, here's what we're thinking with this strategy. And it's great. I know several people who've kind of become famous, like Zaria Parvez. She's the Duolingo owl mastermind. And the fact that I know her name off the top of my head, I mean, that's something that wouldn't have happened a few years ago. But I think it's been good because if you have someone you can talk to about that strategy, and if you have someone where you could say, oh, that's, an interesting thing you did there, let's talk about it, that's more talking about it that's happening. I think that attaching individuals to things and letting them have their own voices is nothing but good because that's so many more people who can hear the message.
That's really a mic drop moment just there, isn't it?
I don't want to drop my mic. I
No,
don't
please
want to
don't.
hurt
Please
it.
don't.
Please
Yeah.
don't do that.
Hey, Mike. No.
There's always one, isn't there? Um, Look, thank you so much for coming on today, Christine. I
Thank you
really
for
appreciate
having
you.
me.
We had you back in what episode did you say?
85.
That was in
Wow.
year 2. That was in year 2, Christine. So
Yeah.
you were long overdue.
Yeah, I was like 18. No, just kidding.
Ah!
But social media, sorry, personal branding, I don't think was my thing yet back then. So that's part of why I wanted to come back on. And also because I always love talking to you two. I mean, when we see
No.
each other at events, I'm always happy to see you. So I had to get back on.
Oh,
Thanks
we
for
love
And
you
having
too,
me.
Christine.
I have to say the drinks we had at in London, they were
Yeah.
rather epic as well. So
Yes.
we must do that again. In fact, we'll probably see you again at Atomicon, I would assume.
Oh, definitely, if not before. But I have not missed a single Atomicon yet, and I don't plan
Mm,
to.
yeah, me neither. So okay, well, that's all for now, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in and listening to Christine. I do hope you've written down, and if you haven't, go back and listen to all the useful top tips you just had from Christine there. We'll be back next week with another podcast. But if you've got any questions, anything that you'd like to pass on to Christine, how do we find you? Because I've just remembered I need to make sure we do this. So, Christine, how do we find you? How do we reach you?
I'm so easy to find. Just try not to find me. No, Christine Gritmon. Gritmon is spelled Grit, like when something's gritty, like sand, and then MON, like Monday. So I'm at Gritmon.com. I'm Christine Gritmon everywhere. And I have my own podcast, Let's Talk About Brand. And that will also tell you how to find me.
Awesome. Now I'm really going to go now.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
And she waved again.
I did. Did you notice that I had intrusions.
Oh, no.
Intrusions, yes.
Yeah.
This is recorded live, guys. Yeah, we're not AI. I had people opening doors, looking at me, go, "Oh, sorry," and then somebody else coming in, going, "Oh, that's what they meant. Oh, sorry."
This is why I have a light
They won't let me
on
put a
air.
light up.